There are words you speak in a seemingly harmless moment, yet they're enough to make others stop seeing you the same way. Not because you meant harm, nor because you lacked knowledge, but because that one sentence betrayed the calm, the reason, and the depth expected of a grown man. The frightening part isn't that you were wrong. It's that you didn't notice you just lost someone's respect in silence. We often speak without thinking, react instead of reflect, then wonder why others no longer trust us. But a man who lives with intention knows that every word he utters leaves a mark, either lifting him closer to his inner strength or pulling him further from it. Stoicism doesn't teach us to stay silent completely. It teaches us to speak less so we may understand ourselves more. In this life, it isn't knowledge, achievements, or status that define who you are. It's how you carry yourself in moments that seem trivial. So today, we'll look closely at 7 seemingly harmless phrases that may quietly erode our wisdom and dignity from within. 1. I already know. The mind shuts down the moment you think you've learned enough. Nothing kills growth faster than a seemingly harmless phrase, I already know. It's short, easy to say, and often delivered with a confident smile. But what makes it dangerous isn't the words themselves, but the attitude they quietly reveal. A mind that has slammed shut the door to learning, all to protect the image of someone who already knows. And in that very moment, you think you've learned enough, you've just rejected the one thing that could move you forward. Humble curiosity. I remember once, as a young employee at a creative agency, I was assigned to work with a senior art director, a man with decades of experience, who had collaborated with top brands. As he began giving feedback on a design I had just completed, I, eager to prove myself, blurted out, "Yes, I already know that." The words weren't rude or disrespectful, but he said no more. He simply nodded, lowered the hand pointing to the screen, and let me continue on my own. The meeting ended earlier than usual. No one criticized me, but I felt I had lost something valuable, the willingness of someone who had walked hundreds of paths I was just beginning to step into. Worse still, I felt I had betrayed the man I hoped to become. Someone who listens, who learns, and who knows when to stay quiet. Because the truth is, I already know, rarely speaks of knowledge. It speaks of the fear of being seen as not good enough. It's a mask of pride we wear to cover our impatience, our lack of self-trust, and our fear of admitting, I'm still learning. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with absolute power, yet a lifelong student, once wrote, "Be ready to be convinced if truth and reason require you to change your opinion." There is no place for arrogant pride in the mind of one who seeks wisdom. In fact, the more you know, the more you realize how little you understand. The wise don't fear repetition. They understand that every time you listen, you see from a different angle. A small detail, a strange nuance, a buried experience, any of these can shed new light on something you thought you already knew. I once witnessed a university professor sit silently while a freshman explained a classic theory in psychology. When I asked why he didn't interrupt, knowing he understood the topic 100 times better, he simply smiled. Because I want to see how the young interpret the old. And sometimes, the way they repeat something familiar helps me understand it deeper than I ever have. That response, to me, is the embodiment of true wisdom, the humility and perception, and the belief that no one is too wise to listen. The phrase, "I already know," is often an excuse to avoid questioning ourselves, to dodge the discomfort of asking, do I know it but not yet live it? Do I understand it or just recall the words? Do I know it well enough to teach it from experience? It's unfortunate when a phrase repeated unconsciously becomes the lid on our awareness. The intelligent man chooses to listen a little longer, even if he already knows. Not because he doubts what he knows, but because he understands that each moment of listening is a chance to practice calm, refine receptiveness, and build a more solid character, not by asserting himself, but by allowing others to finish their thoughts. And never forget, in every relationship, from work to private life, listening isn't just an intelligent act, it's a respectful one. When you say, "I already know," you're sending a signal. You don't need to say more, "I'm not listening." But when you stay silent, attentive, you give the other person a sense of worth, and sometimes that alone makes them want to share more, deeper, more honestly. Stoicism doesn't teach us to be passive or reserved. It teaches us to control our responses deliberately. And sometimes, the best form of control isn't a quick reply, but a well-timed silence. So next time you're about to say, "I already know," pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, "I know this, but can I understand it more deeply?" That single question opens a door not just to new knowledge, but to a calmer, humbler, wiser version of yourself. 2. I'm too old. A disguised surrender. Some words sound humble, but in truth, they are quiet rejections of life. "I'm too old" is one of them. It doesn't shout like despair, nor carry the defiance of youthful turmoil. It merely whispers softly enough to go unnoticed, low enough to seem like acceptance. But the truth is, it's not acceptance. It's surrender, quiet, gradual, dangerous. I once spoke with a 62-year-old man, a retired design engineer, let go early after company restructuring. When I asked, "Why don't you try teaching engineering to students?" he gave a sad smile and said, "I'm too old now. Best to spend my time on simple things." I didn't argue. But inside, something felt wrong. Not because he didn't want to teach, but because he had come to believe a phrase society repeats too often, that once you pass middle age, life should shrink. But that's a lie. And worse, it's disguised as kindness. Rest, slow down, let the young take over. It sounds generous, but often it's a hidden escape from the fear that there may not be another chance to start over. Stoic philosophy never ties limits to the number of years lived. Marcus Aurelius, though a busy emperor, wrote in Meditations, "If death is certain, then the only thing we can do is live with purpose to the very last breath." There's no room for "I'm too old to continue" in a mind that understands the true nature of time. Because time doesn't count age, it counts the life left in each action you choose. I remember a woman named Carla, once a student in a course I taught. She began learning meditation and writing at 68, after losing her husband and with her children gone from home. Many advised her to enjoy old age quietly, but instead, she learned video editing software and launched a YouTube channel sharing her emotional healing journey. 4 years later, she had hundreds of thousands of views, and many young people called her the grandmother of mindfulness. Carla wasn't special, but she didn't say, "I'm too old." She asked, "What can I start now that makes me feel alive?" And that question made all the difference. The phrase, "I'm too old," often stems from fatigue accumulated over the years. No one denies the body has limits, but the issue isn't in the bones, it's in the mind. When you let a number define your ability to learn, create, or challenge yourself, you're locking yourself into a version that has stopped growing. Seneca once wrote, "As long as you are alive, it is never too late to train your soul." The soul, it has no joints to ache, no muscles to weaken. It simply grows if you allow it, and that requires only one thing: the belief that today still matters, if you dare to live it as your first day. I've met people at 55, 60, 70 who started writing books, learning instruments, practicing yoga, giving to charity, or finally learning to love themselves after decades of shame. And I've met people in their early 30s who already retreat into a shell of safety, repeating, "It's too late now." The issue is not age. The issue is the mindset you choose. The wise man doesn't see age as a closing bell. He sees it as proof of endurance that he's still standing, still conscious enough to ask, "Can I live the rest of this life better?" And if the answer is yes, what are you waiting for? You don't have to change the world. Just change how you walk into tomorrow. Learn something you once thought you were too late for. Write your first journal entry. Make the phone call you've delayed. Enroll in the class you always assumed was for younger people. Do anything as long as it pulls you toward what makes you feel alive. Because in the end, what makes you grow old isn't the years passing by, it's the moment you believe you have nothing left to give. And you have more than you think. So, next time you feel tempted to say, "I'm too old," replace it with this: "I still have time, and I'll use it to truly live." Because if you're still breathing, you're still becoming. And in that becoming, so much is still waiting for you starting now. 3. I'll do it later. The graveyard of good intentions. It's not the big mistakes that haunt us for a lifetime, but the small things we once meant to do yet never did. An unsent message, an unfinished apology, a dream delayed because it wasn't the right time. The phrase, "I'll do it later," sounds gentle, reasonable, even harmless. But it is the soft pillow that lulls our most important intentions to sleep. I once knew a man named Alan, a successful businessman, busy like most of us. He always said he would make time for his parents on weekends, call an old friend after the next meeting, take a short trip to unwind after this project. Every time I asked, he'd smile. "I know, I'll do it next week." But next week never came. One day, while he was busy at the office, his father passed away. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. In that moment, everything he had been juggling suddenly felt meaningless. The only thing left was a string of regret for what he never got to do simply because he thought he still had time. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." Not to instill fear or gloom, but to wake you from the illusion that time is abundant. Because we never truly know if the right moment will come or if it's always out of reach. "I'll do it later" carries a strange comfort. It makes us feel safe, as if we've already committed, just not yet. But that very feeling is an anesthetic, dulling the urgency of what must be done now. A wise man does not act out of fear, but he acts because he understands the value of time. He doesn't say later to what matters. He doesn't delay the necessary conversation, doesn't postpone the habit he needs to build, doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect before moving. Because he knows perfection never comes before action, only after. I once held an apology letter in my email drafts for weeks. One click was all it took. But I kept delaying it, thinking it's not the right time. By the time I finally decided to send it, the person had moved to another city, cutting off all contact. I'll never know if that apology could have healed anything because I left it in the future and never made it real. Seneca once warned us of procrastination with a brutally honest image. We are surrounded by death every day, yet we behave as if we are immortal. And truly, each passing day adds to our list of intentions while shrinking the time left to fulfill them. A wise man doesn't wait for confidence, ideal conditions, or spare time. He acts in the midst of uncertainty because he understands. Procrastination is the gentlest way to lose what's most precious. What's troubling is that the things we put off are rarely trivial. They're often deeply meaningful. A call to a loved one, a short walk to breathe, a journal entry to clear your mind, a small project that's been on your heart for years. But the more valuable it is, the more we fear beginning, because we want to do it well. And that very desire keeps us from doing anything. Be honest. Is there something you've meant to do for a long time but haven't started yet? A decision, a message, an action? Then what's stopping you? If your answer is, "I'll do it later," maybe now is the time. Not tomorrow, not when life aligns, but the moment you realize you're about to delay. Because in Stoic philosophy, there is no such thing as someday. There is only now. Now is the only place you can act, live in line with your values, and make the choices that shape who you become. So don't let one more thing be buried in the graveyard of good intentions. Begin. Send that message. Write the first line of that book. Say that apology. Sign up for that course. Spend time with the one you love. Action doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Because one small step today could mean the difference between a life unfinished and a life lived fully, one day at a time. 4. It's not my fault. And you've just surrendered your power over your life. There's a natural reflex we often have when things fall apart, to look for someone to blame. At work, in love, in family, when results don't go our way, we're quick to raise our hands, shake our heads, and say, "It's not my fault." And in the moment we utter those words, we may feel relieved, but we've also just given away the only thing that can change anything: the power to own our choices. I once watched a colleague lose a major project. As soon as he got the news, he sent a detailed email to our boss listing every reason. The client changed requirements last minute. Design was behind deadline. Sales didn't support in time. Everything except himself. I don't doubt his reasons were true. But I knew this much. When you spend too much energy proving you're not at fault, you have no energy left to learn from the failure. Seneca once reminded us, we don't control everything that happens, but we always control how we respond. And that first response, the defensive one called, "It wasn't me," is exactly what keeps us from seeing the growth hidden in every failure. "It's not my fault" may sound like a bold stand to protect your reputation, but it's actually a subtle refusal to take responsibility. When you say it, you're really saying, "I don't need to change. Others are the problem." And that denial keeps you stuck, repeating mistakes, situations, and disappointments again and again. I remember my first time leading a project. The outcome fell short. I had plenty of reasons to explain it away: impossible deadline, budget cuts, a team that wasn't ready. But instead of justifying, I wrote a report to the whole team, identifying 3 things I hadn't done well. I didn't assign tasks clearly, I didn't check progress regularly, and I didn't create a safe space for honest feedback. When I sent it, I was nervous, but the response I got wasn't blame. It was respect, cooperation, a new spirit. We fix this together. We don't blame. That's what a mature man understands. Responsibility isn't a burden. It's a quiet kind of power. When you claim your share, even if it's small, you're telling yourself, "I'm not waiting for others to change. I'm changing myself first." Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens that harms us, but how we view it." And the clearest view begins when we ask, what could I have done differently, even just a little? That question doesn't just offer solutions, it builds someone others can genuinely trust in the future. A wise man doesn't scramble to wash his hands of every mistake. He's not obsessed with who's wrong. He asks, what can I do better next time? Because he knows every choice, even how he responds to failure, shapes the man he's becoming. And more than that, When you take responsibility, you don't just change outcomes, you inspire others to do the same. A man who says, "I was wrong here," makes others want to trust him, follow him, learn from him. Real strength isn't about keeping your image intact. It's about being brave enough to admit you're not perfect and that you're working on it. So next time you feel "it's not my fault" rising in your throat, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, is there even a small part of this that I can take responsibility for? The answer might not feel good, but it will make you stronger. Because adults don't wait for the world to apologize. They learn to stand back up and move on, quietly, steadily. That is the mark of a wise mind firmly steering its own life. 5. I don't need help. The trap of pride. There's a kind of loneliness so common no one sees it. It doesn't come from being abandoned, nor from lacking companionship. It comes from a dangerous belief masked by the word independence. I don't need help. It sounds strong, self-reliant, resilient. But behind those words, more often than not, lies the fear of judgment, the shame of appearing weak, and a quiet pride eating away at your heart without you even noticing. I've fallen into that trap. In the early years of building my career, I believed that a grown man shouldn't ask for help. I carried everything: plans, finances, operations, emotions, pressure. I braced myself to prove I was strong. But the more I braced, the more I drifted from connection, the more I burned out in solitude, and the more each day felt like a private battle no one witnessed. I remember once, after a major presentation fell short, a close friend offered to sit and talk. I declined. I said, "It's fine, I'm okay." But I wasn't okay. I just didn't have the courage to say, "I need someone to sit with me right now." And when I got home, in the silence of my room, I realized the self-reliance I was holding on to wasn't making me stronger, it was isolating me from those who genuinely cared. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire, still wrote in Meditations about the people he owed. From philosophy teachers, to mentors in politics, to friends who helped him reflect daily. An emperor had no shame in saying, "I wouldn't have come this far without them." So why do we ordinary people believe we must carry everything alone? The phrase, "I don't need help," may stem from past wounds. Maybe you trusted the wrong person. Maybe you were taken advantage of when you were vulnerable. Maybe you opened up and got hurt, and so you built a wall. You said, "I'll handle it all myself." But a wise man knows the wall that protects you from pain is also the wall that keeps out love and support. Epictetus emphasized, man is not made to live alone. We are made to cooperate, to give and receive. Stoicism doesn't teach weakness. It teaches you when to let go of pride to hold on to something greater. Genuine connection. I once coached a man in his 50s, a former Marine. Tough, disciplined, fiercely independent, but when he faced loss of his wife, his job, his direction, he endured in silence for a year. Only when he finally joined a support group did he admit, "I don't need saving. I just need to be heard." And strangely, I only felt strong again when I could say, "I can't get through this alone." Asking for help doesn't make you smaller. It expands you, takes you into places you couldn't reach alone. A wise man doesn't seek dependence. He seeks timely support to maintain his internal balance. Because he understands. No oak tree grows tall by standing alone in a desert. It grows in a forest with wind, soil, rain, and light, each element vital. Next time you're about to reject a helping hand, pause. Not to depend, but to remember, allowing others to help isn't weakness, it's the sign of a mature mind. You don't need to shout, I need help. Sometimes all it takes is sitting with someone, sending a message, sharing a small piece of what you're carrying, and then receiving what you thought you didn't deserve, empathy. Because in the end, the path to maturity isn't built on solitude. It's built on the moments when we admit we can't walk the whole journey alone. And you don't have to, because none of us should. 6. That's just who I am. The phrase that kills all possibility of change. Few phrases sound more harmless, yet carry more damage than this. That's just who I am. 6 simple words, cloaking a quiet surrender. A surrender to growth, to transformation, to becoming a better version of oneself. It's like shutting a door, not because you can't walk through, but because you refuse to turn the key. I once worked with a manager who had a short temper, often yelling at staff over minor errors. When offered feedback, he'd shrug and say, "That's how I've always been. I've had a temper since I was a kid. It's too late to change now." It came off as self-deprecating humor, but in truth, it was the perfect excuse to avoid responsibility for his actions. That's just who I am sounds like a statement of fate, as if personality were carved in stone, never to be changed. But the wise man knows nothing about us is fixed unless we insist on keeping it so. Every behavior is a habit, and every habit can be restructured if we're committed enough and conscious enough to begin again. Epictetus once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our thoughts about them." That truth doesn't just apply to the external world, it applies to our inner world, too. It's not your personality that limits you, but the story you tell about it. When you say, "That's just who I am," what you're really saying is, "I don't want to endure the discomfort of change." But no growth ever happens inside your comfort zone. And there's no real freedom if you're still imprisoned by your former self. I once met a man in his 40s who avoided serious relationships. When we talked, he said, "I've never known how to love deeply. I've always been cold like that." But after months of inner work, digging through past wounds and learning to open up, he returned and said, "Maybe I was like that. But I choose not to be anymore." That sentence simple, yet powerful. Because it marks a shift from default to intention, from being controlled to taking control, from living by habit to living by conscious choice. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Each morning you are given the chance to begin again. So why live as if you are bound to yesterday?" And that's what those who live with intention always remember. You are not required to be yesterday's version of yourself, unless you choose to be. Maybe you've failed many times and called yourself someone who can't succeed. Maybe you've hurt people and believe I'm just a bad person. Maybe you've been lazy, impulsive, undisciplined, and told yourself, "I was born this way." But you are not the sum of scattered behaviors in the past. You are the person who chooses what to do with those memories today. Change doesn't happen in a single moment of willpower. It happens every time you resist your old excuse. Every time you want to explode but choose instead to breathe. Every time you want to run from responsibility but choose to own it. Every time you're tempted to give up but take one more step. Those small choices are what truly rewrite you. So next time you're about to say, "That's just who I am," stop. And instead ask, "Who do I want to become?" Because the answer to that question is not in the past. It's in the next action you choose. A wise man doesn't deny who he once was, but he isn't bound by it either. He knows growth has no finish line, and each day, if lived with awareness, is another chance to rewrite himself with courage and dignity. No one is born complete, but anyone can grow if they're willing to let go of the phrase, "That's just who I am," because ultimately, you weren't born to repeat yourself. You are born to outgrow yourself quietly, steadily, and with pride. 7. That's not possible. A small phrase, heavy consequences. Some phrases carry no anger, no overt negativity, and yet they quietly corrode the human spirit in the most persistent way. That's not possible is one of them. It's brief, sounds reasonable, even practical, but so practical that it kills all potential for change before it ever begins. I once met an older man, a technical manager at a construction firm. When I proposed a process improvement using digital technology, something already being tested by other companies in the industry, he looked at me, not with anger or contempt, just shook his head and said, "That won't work, kid." Not because he had tried and failed, not because he had data to disprove it, but simply because it was unfamiliar and it was new. In that moment, I realized what he was rejecting wasn't the idea, it was the possibility that he could adapt. And from then on, I started to notice how many times in my own life I had said something similar, not because I had tested it and found it untrue, but because I didn't yet have the courage to try. That's not possible is the declaration of a mind that has shut its doors to unborn possibilities. It doesn't reflect whether something can or cannot be done. It reflects the limited beliefs of the one who speaks it. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And nowhere is this more accurate than in the things we label impossible. Most limitations don't come from a harsh world. They come from fears we've quietly invented in our own minds. When you say, "That's not possible," you cut off the chance to learn. You erode creativity. You assume the future must mirror the past, which is nothing less than sentencing your life to an endless loop. I once read the story of a man named Chris Nikic, the first person with Down syndrome to complete an Ironman, one of the most grueling athletic events in the world. Doctors had once said he'd never move normally, let alone run, swim miles, and cycle for hours. But he and his coach never started a session by saying, "This can't be done." They asked a different question. What can we do today to get closer to that? And it was that mindset, one that acknowledged difficulty but refused to be boxed in by it, that brought him to the finish line. A wise man isn't blindly optimistic, but he also doesn't let realism become an excuse for stagnation. He knows some things take time, trial, and failure, but he doesn't call them impossible just because they're not easy. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't be intimidated by difficulty. If it's humanly possible, you can do it." That's not just motivation. It's a sober reminder. Many things once deemed impossible, flying through the sky, speaking across oceans, curing terminal illness, became real because someone refused to believe they weren't. The most dangerous thing about saying "that's not possible" isn't that you won't do it. It's that you stop thinking of other ways to approach it. Stop acquiring the skills needed. Stop asking for help. Stop taking small steps forward. I once worked on a community project with nearly zero funding. No one believed it could take shape, but instead of asking, "How do we get enough money?" we asked, "What can we start that doesn't require money?" From a small meeting with 5 people and a whiteboard, it became a support network for hundreds of young people within 3 years. Not because we were brilliant, but because we refused to begin with, "That's not possible, and so can you." Pay attention. The next time you're about to dismiss a new idea, a sudden change, or a challenge that seems too big, pause. Ask yourself, am I sure it's not possible, or am I just afraid to fail? Have I even tried? Have I asked enough questions? Have I done enough? Because often, the only thing truly impossible is the refusal to act from the very first step. A man of inner strength is not someone who always accomplishes the extraordinary. He is the one who doesn't give up when the extraordinary has yet to begin. So the next time you want to say, "That's not possible," replace it with a new phrase. "There's still a way if I'm patient enough to find it." And that phrase, if repeated long enough, will take you to places you never believed you could reach. I don't write these words from the perspective of an outsider, but from my own experience, someone who has said all 7 of those phrases, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes as a way to protect the vulnerability within. I've turned down opportunities to learn just to save face, postponed important decisions out of fear of being wrong, and held on to pride when I should have asked for help. And I paid for it. Not with loud failure, but with the quiet sense of stagnation, with the exhaustion of pretending to be strong, with missed opportunities that slipped away in silence. But from that place, I learned this. Awareness doesn't come from avoiding mistakes, but from facing the truth of who you are, without running, without blaming. And sometimes, just by changing one sentence, just by pausing for a breath before repeating something familiar, you can open a new path where you are no longer limited by the person you once were, but guided by the person you are striving to become. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next one. And remember, you don't have to speak loudly to earn respect. Sometimes, the right silence is the clearest sign of a mind that has been disciplined. I'll see you in the next video.